Welcome to Close Listening. I'm Zach Morgenstern, joined as always by silent co-host Ludwig von B. Today we're going to be talking about another side of Bob Dylan. Now, I'm a big fan of cover art, and as far as cover art goes, this has to rank up there with certainly the more boring album designs and even the more boring Bob Dylan designs. Part of me is asking why I even bought this record. Well, part of it was that I was visiting Oxford, England, and I just wanted to buy some things from this really cool record store I passed by, and this was one of the things that's there. But also it has some of my favorite Bob Dylan compositions on it. It Ain't Me, Babe is a big one for me, and also All I Really Want to Do and Chimes of Freedom. That said, those latter two are kind of my favorites because they were later recorded on the Byrds album, Mr. Tambourine Man, one of the pinnacle albums of folk rock. Another side of Bob Dylan is Bob Dylan still in his phase where it's just him and the one instrument he plays. There's one track where he plays piano, and otherwise it's him and his guitar, and occasionally he has the harmonica thing around his neck. And sometimes that style works great for me. Sometimes I think it's really inspiring because it sends the message, you don't need to have connections. You don't need to have a band to make great music. And I think on songs like With God on Our Side or Don't Think Twice, It's All Right on his previous albums, that simplicity really works. Now, does it always work? Probably not. And that's why after this album, Bob Dylan started seeking out backing bands to breathe more life into his sometimes very long tunes. In early 1964, Bob Dylan came out with an album defined by its commitment to protest. I just talked about that album. It's called The Times They Are A-Changing. But Bob Dylan was never a pure protest singer and needed to walk things back before he got pigeonholed as the voice of conscious generation. So in the opening track to this album, All I Really Want to Do, and the great version of that song again is recorded by the Byrds, Bob Dylan says there are all these things he doesn't want to do. He just wants to be friends with you. This track resonates with my own lived experience. Many of us are, small people in this huge, unequal world. It's important to have good politics, but lots of the time, good politics are just kind of a form of branding because we don't actually have the power to enact this. And one of the lessons I've had to learn in recent years is that the people I get along with best are not necessarily those who appeal to me most consistently on ideological levels. Sometimes it helps when people disagree with me a little because I can tell they are good listeners, that they are friends with me despite my politics, that they don't just see me as part of their team, but they value me as a person. And thus the lyric in this song. Now I ain't looking to compete with you, beat on, cheat on, mistreat you, simplify you, classify you, deny, defy, or mystify you. Track number 3, Spanish Harlem Incident, is another song that the Byrds would go on to cover, though this one isn't a particular favorite of mine. Dylan sings, I'm hopeless, come and take me into the reach of your rattling drums. I gotta know, babe, all about my fortune, down all along the restless palms. So in the context of this album, this song serves as a reference to Dylan feeling lost, that he no longer has or no longer feels comfortable giving his political voice. Beyond that, I just don't think it's a very interesting song. It's in this awkward in-between place where it's not quite pop rock, but it's not quite folk either, so it's just not catchy to me. Track number 4 is The Chimes of Freedom. When I was reading about this one, a lot of people cite it as being inspired by the French poet Arthur Rimbaud, who was alive from, I think, roughly 1851 to 1890. And I'm not a poetry guy, but from what I understand, Rimbaud's historical significance is that rather than writing poetry that directly described the places he was observing or his moods in a given moment, he tried to give a grandiosity to his symbols. What he was seeing was not things directly in front of him, but allegories for broad social or political phenomena. So I just glanced at a few Rimbaud poems before doing this, but it's very clear that that's what's going on in this Bob Dylan song. This song that has since been adapted by Amnesty International as a song about wanting freedom for people around the world, prisoners of conscience, etc. It's not described directly as about any one cause. Rather, it's about people watching this thunderstorm and knowing at the end of all this great danger that there's still hope, that there's still this great ideal of freedom. So this is a Dylan political song, but it also very much isn't a Dylan political song. Firstly, because it could be embraced by a more ideologically neutral organization like Amnesty International. It wasn't as aligned with the political left. But beyond that, it's sung from the perspective of an observer, someone observing the thunderstorm and saying, okay, but the chimes of freedom are flashing in the distance. So Dylan is saying, I can document the political world, but I'm not necessarily going to contribute my philosophy to it. Track number 5 is called I Shall Be Free, number 10. This is a talking blues, and I've explained this before. Talking blues all kind of sound the same. They're and as the title implies, they involve talking. And I guess because Dylan was more a poet than a musician, in this genre, he feels more comfortable. And I've noticed when he does more talking blues stuff, he does lean more into being political. So after the first verse of the song, where he again distances himself from the political Dylan of the past, I'm just average, common too. I'm just like him, same as you. I'm everybody's brother and son. I ain't different than anyone. He goes on to say, no, we can't help but make strong political statements. No, I'm liberal, but to a degree, I want everybody to be free. But if you think that I'll let Barry Goldwater move in next door and marry my daughter, you must think I'm crazy. So this is a hilarious little verse for those who don't get it. He's making fun of people who say, I wouldn't let my daughter marry a black man, to saying, I wouldn't let my daughter marry this Republican who was seen as an early progenitor of modern racist politics. Track number 7 is called Motor Psycho Nightmare. Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, which I haven't actually gotten around to seeing, is a big influence on this one. It's a silly and ambitious tune about irking the wrath of a farmer, again using this trope of conservative man not wanting his daughter to get messed up in the dirty hippie world. Because Dylan has this protective cloak of silliness and just writing a song in a sort of country Western style, he again allows him to be political. And I would say this is the great protest song of this album, because it's a protest song pretty directly about McCarthyism. It goes, I said I like Fidel Castro, think you heard me right, and I ducked as he swung at me with all his might. He still waits for me constantly on the sly. He wants to turn me into the FBI. Me, I romp and stomp, thankfully as I romp. Without freedom of speech, I might be in the swamp. Track number 8 is called My Back Pages. This is not another one of the songs that seem very clearly as pulling back from his political identity, though it's an abstract song, so you're not going to catch that if you're not listening to the lyrics closely. So he sings, girls' faces formed forward path from phony jealousy to memorizing politics of ancient history. Ah, but I was so much older then, I'm younger than that now. So this seems to be a rejection of trying to follow Suze Rotolo's guidance on political songwriting. Dylan no longer wants to diagnose the good and bad of the world. He just wants to be a poet. Track number 10 is Ballad in Plain D. Now, this is the controversial song of this album. This is the song that is really most of this moment, because it is Dylan painstakingly telling the story of his breakup with Suze Rotolo from his perspective, and his dislike for her mother and her sister Carla, who he outright calls a parasite. I once loved a girl, her skin it was bronze, with the innocence of a lamb, she was gentle like a fawn. Of the two sisters, I loved the young, with sensitive instincts, she was the creative one. The constant scapegoat, she was easily outdone by the jealousy of others around her. So you can see, even though Bob Dylan is singing this very personal song about how he's mad about how his relationship went down and how much he hates Carla Rotolo, and subtly how he feels bad about starting to cheat on Suze with Joan Baez, he manages to make it sound like some old medieval folk ballad, like the tale of two sisters, the fair one and the evil one. So this song, that could alternatively be called Bob Dylan's Dirty Laundry, shows that even when a lyrical genius is being petty, he finds ways for his talent to shine through alongside the more embarrassing elements of things. And track number 11 is called It Ain't Me, Babe. This song is possibly a breakup song with Suze Rotolo. Perhaps it's a breakup with politics. And perhaps the real point is that the two are connected, because Suze Rotolo inspired Bob to be the political Bob Dylan. And now that he's out of love with her, he sort of feels free from this obligation. Beyond that, what makes this song so effective is its raw admittance of inadequacy. The chorus goes, no, 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 it ain't me, babe. So one critic at the time apparently heard the no, no, no as a parody of the positivity in the Beatles. She loves you, yeah, yeah, yeah. And I don't know if I buy that. It's the words yeah, no are too common in the language, but regardless, there's something to saying how unusual and how striking this emphatic no, this emphatic I'm not good enough lyric is in the song. And while I prefer the full band version from Bob Dylan's Rolling Thunder Revue bootleg albums, it's still a good song in acoustic form, and it's a classic in terms of what it's about. I would also mention that, like the previous album, The Times They Are Changing, the insert to Another Side of Bob Dylan contains poetry. And one thing I'll say is, despite the fact that musically there feels like a huge difference between Another Side of Bob Dylan and The Times They Are Changing, the poetry shows more consistency, that he's the same man, that he likes to observe things about the political world without necessarily making strong commitments himself. Some memorable lines in the poetry include, Irma goes to Israel and writes me there, they hate Nazis much more than we over here do. Eichmann dies, yes, and West Germany sends 80-year-old prunes out, Gestapo hermit out to the penitentiary. Or college student trails me with microphone and tape machine, asks me, what do you think of the Communist Party? What Communist Party? He rattles off names and numbers and he can't answer my question. So one can see why Bob Dylan felt the need to change his musical style after this record. It can be very hard to get a song to sound good with just singing and guitar. I think you either have to have a very melodic singing voice, like in God on Our Side, or you have to have a lot of staccato in the guitar playing, like in Don't Think Twice, It's All Right. When you have songs with sort of an in-between sound, like Spanish Harlem Incident, they just kind of sound underproduced. So it's interesting to hear this album as the predecessor to the Byrds' Mr. Tambourine Man. It's probably not going to sound as good as some of the others, but the lyrical content is as great as ever. And I would just throw in, from the perspective of appreciating the songs Dylan makes that are political, it's a shame that I Shall Be Free, number 10, and Motorcycle Number are lesser known songs in the Bob Dylan canon than, say, the Chimes of Freedom, because there's far more political specificity. And especially if you like Bob Dylan, not as sort of like a modern human rights liberal, but as more of a 1960s leftist, you're certainly going to like those songs. I'm Zach Morgenstern. This is Ludwig von B. See you next time.